All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's a strategy session here on Resolute Square. I got to tell you, I am incredibly excited about this. There's a guy on this show, Michael Podhorzer. I think I pronounced his name right.
Or no, it's Podhorzer.
Podhorzer. We've been going back and forth because
Yeah.
Ezra Klein pronounced it wrong. But he's absolutely fascinating. He's a longtime political director at the AFL-CIO. He does an incredible Substack, weekend readings, that you definitely should subscribe to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it won't take long to see why I found it so fascinating. And of course, we have Joe Trippi, longtime Democratic nemesis of mine, who I went up against in campaigns and always hated, but now I get to work with him in the Lincoln Project. So, everybody, welcome to the square. Joe, why don't you lead off? You and Michael
Well,
know each other.
yeah, and I want to say the same thing. I listened to Ezra Klein, but I also saw Michael give a presentation at an innovation summit, looking at ways that we could improve communications and what some of the problems are with polling and other things. And I thought it just was so spot on. So, like you, Stuart, I'm really happy to have Michael with us tonight and look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you.
So, Michael, at a time of, I would say, near panic among a lot of us who fear, like I think you've expressed, that Donald Trump is an existential threat to the country. Your take on this recent polling I thought was fascinating and unique. I think you used a phrase called mad poll disease or something. Can you
Yeah.
kind of take us through why these numbers are, not to say they're inaccurate, but they're not going to be definitive for next year?
Right, sure. And hopefully, like if people who are tuning in are suffering from mad pole disease, they'll be able to get some sleep tonight. The so I think the thing that should be level setting, right, is that really from November 2016 to today, the basic dynamics have not changed. We already know what's going to happen. We know that it's not going to be a landslide. We know that it's going to be incredibly close. We know the 6 state electoral college states it's going to come down to. We can be almost certain it'll come down to less than 100,000 votes in a couple of them. And we know that even a day before, polling can't tell us who's going to actually win, let alone more than a year out. And that's because we also know that each of those cycles, 2018, 2020, 2022, Democrats prevailed because people who previously hadn't been regular voters decided in October they needed to go out and vote, right? And that is especially why polling now doesn't make any sense at all, because what needs to be predicted is what those in and out voters are going to decide to do in October. And that's going to be very contingent on what America looks like in October. And we have no idea. But we know that in those 5 or 6 states, they are on, in every election in this period, they've basically been on a knife's edge. And people in those states have not been changing teams, right? If you voted for Trump, you keep voting for Trump. If you voted for Democrats, you keep voting for Democrats. It's which side comes out more. And polling can tell us today, can tell us nothing about it. And the other piece of it that I think the public really doesn't understand about even polls like the Times Siena, which, starting with a false premise about what it can tell you, do spend like a lot of money and energy trying to be like good methodology, but they're really polling isn't what polling once was, right? Polling used to be based on a scientific idea of probability theory, and it kind of worked for that reason. But
Mm-hmm.
as fewer and fewer people answer the phone or sign up to do online surveys, it's become kind of a different kind of opinion journalism, right? There was ironically, the New York Times in September 2016 did like probably the most important data journalism story ever. They did a survey again and had about 850 interviews of of Trump versus Clinton in Florida, September 2016. They gave it to four
Okay.
outside pollsters who were like not high partisans. They were a lot of respect for them. And with the five assessments, they had Clinton plus four, Clinton plus three, Clinton plus one twice, and Trump plus one, right? These are literally the same 850 interviews, right? But it was these pollsters' different opinions about which
Mm-hmm.
ones of them would show up that led from Clinton winning by four to Trump winning by one, right? That's the state of polling right now. There are so many decisions a pollster has to make that it's just like a pundit saying, like, this is what I think is going to happen, except
Right.
people are like hypnotized when there are numbers or bar charts, or as opposed to just someone on a TV saying, I think, Trump's going to win, or I think Biden's going to
People love numbers.
Right.
We
Yeah.
love the
win. Yeah.
top 10.
Yeah.
We love the top
Well,
10 countdown.
yeah.
We're like, uh, number one with a bullet. It's something about the way our minds work that
But,
Yeah.
Michael, one of the things I thought is that they've sort of become almost like momentary focus groups. It's about how you feel right this minute and not how you're. I
Right.
mean, and just as you would never ever go into a focus group of 10 people and come out going, "Oh wow, this is what's going on here." The press follows them like they're and reports them like they're gospel when they really are nothing. But they've been the science has sort of been wrung out of them, and now they're just sort of like a feeling thermometer for this moment. So if you're angry at the world right now, or you think there's chaos everywhere, okay, you're going to get a lot of blame on whoever the incumbent is. Doesn't I'm not talking about Biden here, but
Right.
that's all going to happen, and then you report it, and of course, it all becomes a rinse and repeat kind of punditry. I think. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's your take
No,
as well.
yeah, I think that we've seen now in several cycles that voters, unlike a lot of people in the media, understand that voting has consequences, whereas take what you say on a survey as a way to vent,
Mm.
right? And we just saw that in Ohio. We just the the
Mm-hmm.
it, it's just all taken so literally, right? And you look
Mhm.
around the world, and pretty much in every country, their leaders, whether they're left or right, or 10 years younger, or 20 years younger, or 30 years younger than Biden, they're just as underwater or more, right? Because in most countries, three-quarter or so of the population is just not happy with anything. And the and I think essentially mostly because we have problems that politicians can't really fix. And so you keep electing someone, no matter who they are, can't solve the problem. One of the things that that's important to think, really breaking point in 2000, since 2000, um, W. Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, when you put aside the bump that Bush got around 9/11 and the first couple months of the Democrats and um, they've been underwater more than three-quarters of the time, right? Trump was underwater the whole
Mm-hmm.
time, right? And pretty much for all of them, once they went underwater once, they never recovered. They never could get back over because people are just grumpy and sad. They don't like stagnating incomes. They don't like now inflation. They don't like that they really can't have big ambitions for their kids. That people, and like all the things especially since the Great Recession, since 2008, right? It's just not a great time to be alive. And when you have leaders who don't have the tools to fix that, you just keep getting the same thing.
So, Michael, let me ask you a question. Something that I say, let me kind of stress test this with you. I ask people, do you think that or do you know anybody who was a uh, Biden 20 voter who now has become a Trump 24 voter? And I mean, I think you'd have to hunt those with dogs. I mean, they're just, I suppose they're out there somewhere. Um, and I know that you're not, well, this is simplifying it, but
Yeah,
you're not 100% bought into the demographics or destiny camp.
right.
Um,
Hardly,
but
yeah,
yeah, but there are more older Trump voters, and Biden does, and it
right,
life insurance business is based upon older voters dying and
right.
younger voters not dying. Um, and so it would seem that Trump needs more new customers than Biden. Is that
Right. No, I mean
remotely logical?
you're making the sort of what must be a cardinal error of actually seeing what's going on clearly, right? I mean, yeah, that's the thing. It's like this country has for several like years now understood that our elections are about whether you want to go in a Trump MAGA direction or not,
Right.
right? Nothing subtle about it anymore. And just as you say, almost nobody has changed sides once they've voted one way or the other because you're literally saying, oh, I guess I did want to abolish abortion. Or, oh, I mean,
I
it's
just
Yeah,
crazy.
forgot.
yeah,
Right. Like, what was I thinking when I
What
voted
was I
for the
thinking? Right.
Democrats?
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
think we ought to
And,
have a
and,
Muslim
right. And
ban. Yeah.
there's a way in which this sort of fetishizing demographics and different groups allows the illusion of movement happening in the electorate when it's not actually happening. Right. If I were like to pay any attention to polling now, it would be to look at exactly what you're saying. Are people who voted for Team Blue switching to red, and are people who voted for red switching to blue? Over these last cycles, there's been maybe 5% that does it every cycle, in every election, and it washes out. You know,
Mm-hmm.
people who are just like confused. But the right, if there were a poll that said here, 20% of the people who voted for Biden are now going to Trump rallies, that would be like something to
Right.
pay attention
Right.
to, right? Because it would show that they're actually now changing their commitment, right? But when you pretend that we don't know that we don't already know who these people voted for, and instead
Mm-hmm.
let them say who you're going to vote for next time, as if who they voted for the last time we can't pay attention to, and then you throw in a lot of statistical weighting and all of that. And then you say, let's not look at it as sort of everybody, but look at it as demographic group and introduce statistical error. Suddenly, group A has moved by this much since the last time we polled. And
Mm-hmm.
most of it is just because the pollster changed their assumptions or random error or stuff like that. Which is not to say, I just want to be clear that the polling that shows, for example, Biden doing much less well with young voters is not reflective of a reality, which is that they're not happy, right? I mean, they're not
Right.
like racing and saying, I love Joe Biden. That's true. But to conclude in a straight line from that in October of 2024, that's going to be enough to let Trump win is a bridge way too far.
Well, I also
Mm-hmm.
think it's the coverage too, because you have the coverage all the big assumption that Trump's invincible and that you can't shake any of his voters and he's going to be the nominee. Actually, kind of like changed the coverage to not why is Trump so weak, but why is Biden so weak? I mean, in other words, all the questioning of the punditry and all the
Right.
questions in the polls are aimed at that. And frankly, Trump's team's smarter this time. They've kind of kept him out of the spotlight, which helps keep the focus on Biden. Young people, as you said, are unhappy with him, but they still are not in the world where they will be. We are, none of us are, where it becomes clear this is if it is Trump, it's Biden versus Trump.
Right.
And now, okay, I'm not happy with Biden, but what am I going to do to actually think, oh, they weren't happy in November of 2023, therefore we can already tell you what's going to happen. No, they
Right.
could. they will,
Yeah.
at least in the last 2 or 3 elections, there have been people. It's you can see it because it's the where he is losing approval right now is with Democrats for the most part. I mean,
Right.
it was and so far every time when faced with Trump and him, those people, I'd rather be if it's a Biden person, I'd rather be in Biden's position where you're trying to bring people home who are already with you the last three
Right.
cycles
Been
than
trying to.
than
Yeah,
what Trump is
let me
going to have
jump
to
in.
do.
Let me
Yeah.
jump in. Michael, I've heard you talk about something I found absolutely fascinating. I don't know anybody else on the planet Earth who's saying this, and that is that you don't believe, you don't, well, correct me if this is improperly posed, but you have a lot of skepticism about the common uh, assumption now that education is driving uh, the divide in our politics. And you have sort of a contrary or
Yeah.
complementary theory you think is more persuasive. Can you talk about that? I
Yeah,
found it
sure.
fascinating.
Yeah. And to go back to, I want to pick up one last thing on what Joe was saying before. He knows he's just reading Weekend Reading then. Right after McAuliffe lost to Youngkin in 21,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like roughly 2 months later, did Weekend Reading saying like that between the J6 hearings coming up and the likely Supreme Court decisions that Democrats really could hold the Senate and like that this wasn't done in the House. Got a lot of eye rolls, but it was the same thing. There was no polling saying that, right? Because people taking polls can't anticipate how they're going to feel after those things were going to happen, right? And so McAuliffe loses, right? That we're sort of in the same thing. Again, I'm not guaranteed go out and like bet on Biden. I'm just saying that don't just stop paying attention to this as useful information. On the education polarization, I think it's there. First, it's important to say that it is accurate that the gap between how people with degrees and people without degrees, their partisanship has gone from being more likely for non-college voters to support Democrats to it being non-college voters more likely to support Republicans. And there's a way, just like with those sort of numbers we were talking about before, for people to not feel like correlation is causation, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like, there's nothing that all that's absolutely true. Those lines work, like all of that is going on. But it is not because some people have college degrees and other people don't, right? It's it's things that they're very correlated with, right? But if you think about it as having to do with this impersonal force of like education, right? It allows you to not realize that it is about the question we've been talking about whether you want a MAGA future or not a MAGA future. And it turns out that people who want a MAGA future are a little more likely to be not college educated, and people who don't are a little more likely to be college educated, right? But it's not because of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for people who like want to like think past that simple mindedness, right? If you just wanted to say, and we'll just deal with white voters, like I want to understand white voters by dividing them on one variable and use that to explain everything, then you should use whether or not they claim affiliation with Christian denomination. If it roughly is the case that about the same proportion of white people claim Christian affiliation as are non-college, they're not the same exact set of people, but it's about the same, and about the same for college and are not saying Christian. And the people who are Christian are even more Republican than the non-college, and the people who are non-Christian are even more Democratic than the other, right? And so, like, if you like want like a single shot, it's inside the poll. Why aren't you looking at a division of white voters? This has been about religion, right?
And
And
that's
it's been insane that people haven't been acknowledging that, and then get surprised when Mike Johnson is Speaker of the House, right? The
right, because the members, I heard you talk about this, the members actually are all coming from those districts in which they're
right,
actually much more evangelical or Christian
right,
oriented districts. And that's where, so the party itself in the House is becoming more and more like that, which gets you
right, right.
Speaker
But
Johnson.
it's not just because those are the voters. It's because there's something crucially different about being about using like the idea of evangelical and the idea of using non-college, right? Like
Right.
non-college people don't gather themselves in church every week, right? There's not a non-college broadcasting network, right?
Right.
There's
Yeah.
right, right,
Right. So
like
they're
the
constantly reinforced. Yeah.
right. Non-college is something that pundits or academics use to
Right.
describe a set of voters they've defined as being similar, right? Evangelical is something people say about themselves, right? You don't go around and find people who say, "Hi, I'm non-college," right?
Right.
Well,
Or
Joe's wearing a Harvard T-shirt, just so we'll make
yeah,
that.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
I am.
But
Most of
even
us don't do that. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, and I
On a
think both
show like this.
right. And one thing which, right, is really important that both of you, as having actually run campaigns, know, right? It's another of the sort of national polling silliness, right? If you're running a campaign, you don't look at a national poll and use that to tell you what the
Yeah.
voters in the place you're trying to win an election care about, who they are, any of that. And even like when you see these stories about like what are the factions inside the Republican voters, right? They just take a national sample of Republicans and tell you. But that itself misleading because the set of Republicans who live in Republican congressional districts look very different from the Republicans who live in Democratic districts. And obviously the former, much more right wing, right? And like the Republican members of Congress aren't looking at national polls to figure out what their constituents want. They're looking at
They
polls of
could
their
care less.
constituents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Right.
Michael, this brings me to a theory that I have because of what you're saying about us being involved in, running
Yeah.
campaigns, we wouldn't be looking at the national polls. So what the punditry and the press is doing now is they keep looking at these national polls where Trump is, 62 or 59 or whatever and 30, 40 points ahead of his nearest competitor. And they buy into that and they keep preaching the invincibility. None of these people are doing anything. But when you actually look at Iowa or New Hampshire and you see Trump at like 42 and DeSantis at 16 and Haley at 16. And it's even worse that's in Iowa, actually, the numbers I just gave you. In New Hampshire, it's 42-20 for Haley and I think 16-17 for Christie. Um, it just tells me he's much weaker than than people think. In other words, that I think there is some erosion going on. I'm not clear why or what, but I do think that people are going to be surprised because the press is overplayed and the polling punditry is sort of like overplayed how strong he is. This is one of the reasons I actually think Biden is better off than even we think today in terms of what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
I think Trump's going to have a tougher time. He'll win the nomination probably, but I do think it's if you keep reading the national polls on him, I think you're missing some key places where he could be in trouble.
So I really don't spend a lot of time thinking about the question you're asking, but I do want to
Okay.
like throw something into that. So the I think one of the on the list of things to indict national horse race polling for is I think it has been one of the most important factors in whatever the actual extent of domination Trump has over the rest of the Republican field.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go back to right after the midterms, and there was this general Republican awareness that Trump had kind of messed things up, right? And it was believable that he was beatable. And I think all of the Republicans who got in had a version of a strategy that was, I'm going to basically hug him, think he was a great president, but we need someone electable in 2024. And when the mainstream press is saying that Trump is very electable, they
Yeah.
literally have no argument, right? They, right, for even being on the debate stage, right? Which is
Right.
why they look so
Right.
silly, right? But it's actually been sort of mainstream horse race polling that's completely cut the legs out from under them, right? And they have like not a case to make for why them, not Trump, that like gets you in, more than a few percentage points. And so I think it's actually kind of hard for them, right? And in a way, but again, I'm not like, I wouldn't know the numbers you were saying, Joe, but structurally, it seems like the mainstream media cut off the argument of all the other Republican candidates.
I think they're
Michael,
going to be surprised. I really do. Because I am looking deep into those
Yeah.
numbers,
No,
and I
that could
think
very
there's,
well be.
yeah, I think they're going
yeah,
to be surprised. Which good, they deserve it anyway.
Yeah.
Michael, before we let you go to bed, Michael's in London, by the way, so
Yeah.
we're particularly appreciative of him doing this. Do you have thoughts on the possible impact of like a no labels third party candidate? Is this something that you think about much, or just
Well, people ask me all the time. So
yeah, I bet.
right. So the, there's going to be like a, now it's probably a kind of different answer. And it's one that I want to preface by really underscoring that in a race that has the kind of structure that we've been talking about, like wild cards, even like just are not worth the risk. So it's just like not great that that's happening. I think though that the the potential impact if it's someone other than Manchin is more complicated than I've read other people talking about. Because if you go to the electoral college states,
Right,
right, and you sort of divide the electorate into sort of people who voted for Biden or Trump the last time, and then subdivide them into people who had been regular voters in 2016 and those who hadn't been, right? Then maybe 25% to a third of the people who voted for Trump actually live in the reality based world, think Biden won, but really don't hate Democrats and will never do it, right? And that group is the regular voting Republicans and are much more than the Democratic voting regular voters, right? So for them, a third party is a a permission structure to
right,
go out, vote for the rest of the Republicans on the ticket, and have a plausible thing to say in their social
right,
circles about what they're doing. On the Democratic side, the that increment that's been winning for them in those states are people who are coming out because they don't want MAGA and Trump, not because they're not regular voters. And I don't see like any of the people who've been named as being like the magnet for people who want to beat Trump to come out and vote for whoever, right? I'm not saying like, oh, this is going to help us, but I think it's worth thinking through a few steps. I think Manchin is a very different story and is really dangerous, not because he's going to
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
get votes, but because between declaring and the election, he will have to try to depict Biden as extreme as Trump, right? As a
Hmm.
reason to
Yeah.
vote for him. And as one of 51 Democratic senators, it's going to, like, he'll be out to torpedo everything the Democrats are trying to do. And whereas I think the media will mostly be responsible enough not to give a huge platform to other no labels candidates, it can't responsibly not talk to Joe Manchin when they're trying to pass the CR or something, right? And so it isn't that that will let Joe Manchin get a lot of votes. It's that it will take the one thing that we've depended on, which is this clear cut, like Trump's evil, Biden's okay, go vote, right? and it just confuses things.
Well, look, I don't want to keep you up all night, but I could go on all night. That's why everybody who's watching this should subscribe to Michael's Substack, Weekend Reading.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
It is
absolutely.
it's really tremendous. Um, he, in a world where a lot of us tend to say the same thing just differently, but Michael really is unique. He really has spent a lot of time thinking about this and looking at data and coming to conclusions because he thinks they're right, not because they're the conclusions that are accepted by the political class, and that's so rare. I just love it, man.
Oh, well,
Um,
thank you. I really appreciate you saying that.
no,
And I
it's
appreciate people like yourselves who actually do the thing talking about politics, rather than people like who, know how to use spreadsheets or something, you know.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about the people I elected and what they've done to the country, but that's
Yeah,
another
Well, I mean, I said I
I
appreciate
tried.
talking to you. I didn't
I
say I
tried
you
to
know,
stop
appreciate.
him, but
you know.
he
Uh,
he beat me as often as I beat him, so it didn't work out real well.
Yeah.
so thank you, Michael. We
Yeah.
really
Thank
Yeah,
you.
appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining us. The winner of last week's giveaway is Priscilla Smith. That's huge. Your life's going to change. So thank you very much for participating.
but
And go ahead, Joe.
I was going to ask Michael: is there someplace people can find you other than the newsletter?
Um, so we post. I don't want to do so. I don't do social media myself, but
Okay,
all the stuff gets posted on every platform if you want to see it there.
okay, cool.
And yeah. Um, and everybody ought to subscribe to that
Thank
Trippy
you.
show, which is fantastic. It it really brings another unique voice to it. And Brother Rick Wilson, who couldn't join us tonight because it's his birthday and he's out getting drunk, we hope. Um, but subscribe to the enemies list as well. And everybody subscribe to YouTube, Resolute Square on YouTube. Um, and keep the faith. All is not lost. A year
Happy
from now, I think we're going to be celebrating. The odds are better. We're going to be celebrating a good moment for the country than a worse. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Happy
Thank you.
Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yep. Happy
Thank you.
Thanksgiving.
Take care.